My name is Sarah, I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about love, betrayal, and revenge. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. I never imagined that the happiest day of my life would become the beginning of my worst nightmare. Everyone thought I had the perfect marriage, the perfect life. But the truth was so much darker than anyone could have guessed. What I'm going to reveal now, I've never told anyone before, not even my closest friends or family. It was a Tuesday morning in September when I gave birth to Emma, our beautiful daughter. After 12 hours of labor, I was exhausted but overjoyed. The moment they placed her in my arms, I felt complete. My husband Mark was there, holding my hand, tears in his eyes, whispering how proud he was of me. For those precious few hours, everything felt perfect. We took pictures, called our families, and I remember thinking this was the beginning of our real life together as a family. But what I didn't know was that Mark had been planning something devastating while I was bringing our child into the world. As I lay there recovering, holding our newborn daughter, he was already preparing to destroy everything we had built together. The signs were there, I realize now, but I was so focused on the pregnancy and preparing for motherhood that I missed them completely. 3 days later, we brought Emma home. I was still sore, exhausted, and overwhelmed with new mother emotions. The house felt different somehow, quieter, more tense. Mark seemed distant, checking his phone constantly, taking calls in the other room. When I asked him about it, he said it was just work stress, that things would settle down soon. I believed him because I wanted to, because I needed to focus on recovering and caring for our baby. That Friday night, exactly 1 week after Emma was born, Mark waited until I had just finished nursing her and put her down for the night. I was in my pajamas, feeling vulnerable and emotional as new mothers do, when he walked into the living room with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, determined, almost clinical. He sat down across from me, not beside me like he usually did, and I knew something terrible was coming. But what happened next shattered my world in ways I never thought possible. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Those 4 words sent ice through my veins. In 8 years of marriage, he had never used that tone with me before. I could feel my heart starting to race, but I told myself it was just postpartum anxiety, that I was overreacting. Maybe he wanted to discuss sleep schedules or baby care arrangements. I was so naive. He pulled out a manila envelope from behind the couch cushion and placed it on the coffee table between us. The way he did it, so calculated and prepared, told me this wasn't a spontaneous conversation. He had been planning this moment, probably for weeks or even months. While I was growing our child, nesting, preparing our home for our family, he was preparing to end it all. "I want a divorce," he said simply, as if he was asking me to pass the salt. No explanation, no emotion, no acknowledgement of what we had just been through together. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was some kind of sick joke, but his face remained stone cold. The man I had loved for nearly a decade, the man who had just become a father to our week-old daughter, was sitting there calmly requesting to end our marriage. I couldn't speak. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. I looked down at the envelope, then back at his face, searching for any trace of the man I married. Where was the man who used to bring me flowers every Friday? Where was the man who held me when I cried during sad movies? Where was the man who spent months assembling Emma's crib, talking to my belly every night, promising to be the best father in the world? "Why?" I finally managed to whisper. It was the only word I could form. My entire world was crumbling, and I needed some explanation, some reason that would make this devastating moment make sense. But his answer was even more crushing than his request. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, Sarah. We're not compatible anymore. I want different things." Different things. We had literally just created a human being together. We had planned this pregnancy, celebrated every milestone, painted the nursery together. What could possibly be more compatible than that? But I still didn't know the real reason, the truth that would make this betrayal even more unforgivable. As I sat there in shock, trying to process what was happening, Mark continued talking as if he was discussing weekend plans. He explained that he had already spoken to a lawyer, that he wanted joint custody, that he thought it would be better for everyone if we made this as clean and simple as possible. Clean and simple. As if 8 years of marriage and a weak baby could be wrapped up with a neat little bow. I kept waiting for him to show some emotion, some recognition of what he was doing to me, to us, to our daughter. But he remained eerily calm, methodical even. He had thought of everything. He wanted to sell the house, split the assets 50-50, and establish a custody arrangement immediately. It was as if he had been planning this divorce longer than he had planned our wedding. The worst part was how he kept calling it practical. He said it was the practical thing to do, that we should handle this like adults, that fighting would only make things harder on everyone, especially Emma. How dare he use our daughter's name in his justification for abandoning us? How dare he pretend this was somehow in her best interest? I finally found my voice, though it came out shaky and broken. Mark, I just had a baby. Your baby. Our baby. I can barely walk up the stairs without pain. I'm bleeding. I'm exhausted. And you're asking me for a divorce. Can't this wait? Can't we talk about this when I'm not literally recovering from childbirth? But he shook his head, said he had already made up his mind, that waiting would only make things harder. Harder for whom? Certainly not for me, sitting there in my nursing bra and mesh underwear, trying to understand how my husband could be so cruel. I realized then that this wasn't a spontaneous decision, or even a recent one. This had been planned, calculated, timed for maximum impact. That's when I started to suspect there was more to this story. Something he wasn't telling me, and I was right. What I discovered next would change everything, and my response would shock everyone who thought they knew me. But first, I had to survive the next few days, pretending to be okay while my world fell apart. Part for the next few days passed in a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and suppressed rage. Mark acted like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just destroyed our family while I was at my most vulnerable. He went to work, came home, helped with Emma, and slept in our bed as if everything was normal. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. I couldn't eat, could barely sleep even when Emma was sleeping. Every time I looked at him, I felt physically sick. Here was a man who had watched me labor for 12 hours to bring his child into the world, who had cut the umbilical cord with tears in his eyes, who had promised to love and protect us both forever. And yet, 1 week later, he was calmly planning our family's destruction. I called my sister Lisa, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what was happening. How do you explain that your husband waited until you were at your weakest, most vulnerable moment to ask for a divorce? How do you say those words out loud without sounding completely insane? So I made excuses about why I sounded upset, blamed it on hormones and exhaustion. But I wasn't just sad or angry. I was suspicious. Something about Mark's behavior didn't add up. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. Men don't usually wake up one morning and decide they want a divorce, especially not the week after their child is born. There had to be more to this story. I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. His phone habits, his work schedule, the way he avoided eye contact when he talked about the divorce. I noticed he had been doing laundry more often, taking longer showers, being more particular about his appearance. Classic signs that I had been too pregnant and then too focused on the baby to notice. That's when I decided to do something I had never done in 8 years of marriage. I was going to go through his phone. I knew his passcode because we had always been open about that kind of thing, but I had never felt the need to snoop before. I trusted him completely. What a fool I had been. What I found in his phone that night while he slept beside me would explain everything. At 2 a.m, while Mark slept soundly and Emma was finally down for a longer stretch, I carefully picked up his phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I entered his passcode, partly from postpartum hormones and partly from the terrifying certainty that I was about to discover something that would change everything. I went straight to his text messages, and there it was, a conversation thread with someone named Alex that went back for months. For months. I was 7 months pregnant when this started. As I scrolled through the messages, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might wake the baby down the hall. Messages started innocently enough, work-related discussions, then gradually became more personal. By 6 weeks ago, when I was 8 months pregnant and could barely tie my own shoes, they were saying I love you to each other. My husband was having an emotional affair, maybe more, while I was carrying his child. But it got worse. Much worse. As I read further, I found messages about their plans for the future, about how Mark couldn't wait to be free, about how he was just waiting for the right time to end things with me. The right time, apparently, was 1 week after I gave birth to his daughter, The most devastating message was from 3 days ago, the day we brought Emma home from the hospital. Alex had texted, "How did she take it?" And Mark had responded, "As expected. She's too exhausted to fight right now. This is working out perfectly. This is working out perfectly." He had planned to divorce me when I was at my weakest because he thought I wouldn't be able to fight back. He had calculated that I would be too overwhelmed, too physically and emotionally drained to challenge him or investigate his motives. He thought he could manipulate me into accepting his terms because I would be focused on caring for our newborn. I sat there in the dark, reading message after message, feeling my grief transform into something much more powerful. Rage, pure, focused rage, not just because he was leaving me, but because of how he was doing it, the cruelty, the calculation, the complete lack of respect for everything I had just been through. But then I found something that would give me exactly what I needed for my response. As I continued scrolling through the messages, I discovered that Alex wasn't just some random person Mark had met. Alex was a colleague, someone I had met at company parties, someone who had smiled to my face while planning to destroy my marriage. But more importantly, Alex was also married, with 2 young children. The messages revealed that they had been meeting during lunch breaks, after work, even during some of Mark's supposed weekend work emergencies over the past few months. While I was home, pregnant and preparing for our baby, he was with Alex, planning our divorce and their future together. But here's what Mark didn't know about me, what nobody knew about me. I wasn't the helpless, emotional mess he thought I was. Yes, I was hurt and devastated, but I was also methodical and strategic when I needed to be. My career in project management had taught me how to plan, how to anticipate problems, and how to execute solutions efficiently. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every photo they had exchanged, every plan they had made. I documented dates, times, and locations. Mark thought he was so clever, timing his divorce request for when I would be too weak to fight back. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me completely. The next morning, I acted completely normal. I fed Emma, made Mark breakfast, kissed him goodbye as he left for work. He probably thought I was accepting his divorce request quietly, that I was going to be the cooperative, reasonable ex-wife he was counting on. He had no idea that I was planning something that would turn his perfect little scheme upside down. I waited until he was definitely at work. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney, not just any attorney, but the most ruthless, successful divorce lawyer in the city. The second call was to a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. I wanted professional documentation of everything Mark and Alex were doing, but the third call was the most important one, and it would be the key to my response that no one would see coming. The third call was to Alex's spouse, Jordan. I had met Jordan several times at company events, and I knew they were a devoted parent who worked hard to provide for their family while Alex climbed the corporate ladder. Jordan had no idea that their spouse was having an affair with my husband and planning to break up the families. I didn't reveal everything in that first conversation. I simply introduced myself, reminded Jordan how we knew each other, and suggested we meet for coffee to discuss something important about our spouse's work relationship. Jordan was surprised but agreed, probably thinking it was some kind of workplace issue that needed addressing. Meanwhile, I began executing my plan with military precision. Every day, while Mark went to work thinking he was controlling the situation, I was building my case. The private investigator I hired was excellent and discreet. Within 3 days, I had professional photographs of Mark and Alex together, documentation of their meetings, and a complete timeline of their relationship. My attorney was impressed with the evidence I had gathered. She explained that in our state, adultery could significantly impact divorce proceedings, especially regarding alimony and asset division. Mark's plan to get a quick, clean divorce where everything was split 50-50 was about to become much more complicated for him. But I wasn't just preparing for a legal battle. I was preparing for psychological warfare. Mark had chosen to attack me at my most vulnerable moment, thinking I would be too weak and overwhelmed to fight back effectively. He was about to learn that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The meeting with Jordan was scheduled for Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after Emma was born. I had recovered enough physically to get out of the house, and I had planned every detail of what I was going to reveal and how Jordan was going to be my secret weapon, though they didn't know it yet. That morning, Mark kissed me goodbye and told me he hoped I was adjusting well to the new situation. He actually used those words, as if asking for a divorce a week after I gave birth was something I just needed to adjust to, like a new work schedule or a different brand of coffee. What happened at that coffee meeting would set everything in motion. I met Jordan at a quiet cafe across town, somewhere Mark and Alex would never think to look. Jordan arrived looking curious but relaxed, probably expecting to discuss some minor workplace drama. They had no idea their entire world was about to be shattered, just like mine had been 2 weeks earlier. I had thought carefully about how to approach this conversation. I could have been vindictive, could have dropped all the evidence on the table at once and watched Jordan's world explode, but that would have been cruel, and despite everything Mark had done to me, I wasn't going to become a cruel person. Instead, I chose to be direct but compassionate. Jordan, I said, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth. I explained about the divorce request, about the timing, and then I showed them the text messages. I watched Jordan's face change from confusion to shock to devastation as they realized what their spouse had been doing. The most heartbreaking moment was when Jordan whispered, "But we just bought a house." Alex said it was an investment in our family's future. I knew exactly how they felt, that complete disorientation when you realize the person you trusted most has been lying to you for months. But then Jordan surprised me. After the initial shock wore off, they didn't break down crying or get hysterically angry. Instead, they got very quiet and very focused, just like I had. "What do you want to do about this?" they asked. That's when I knew I had found the perfect ally. I laid out my plan. Mark and Alex thought they were so clever, timing everything perfectly, manipulating both of us when we were vulnerable or distracted. But they had made one crucial error. They had underestimated both of us. They saw me as a weak new mother and Jordan as a busy, trusting spouse who wouldn't ask questions. They were wrong on both counts. Jordan was completely on board with my plan. In fact, they added some elements I hadn't thought of that would make our response even more effective. We spent 2 hours in that cafe, planning our coordinated strategy, down to the smallest detail. By the time we left, Mark and Alex had no idea that their victims had become partners. The beauty of our plan was its simplicity and timing. Mark and Alex had scheduled a weekend getaway for the following Saturday, 3 weeks after Emma was born. They thought they were being so discreet, but the private investigator had documented their hotel reservation and their elaborate cover stories. Mark told me he had a work retreat, while Alex told Jordan it was a professional conference. Jordan and I decided this would be the perfect time to execute our response. While they were off celebrating what they thought was their cleverness, we would be implementing our own strategy that would leave them both completely blindsided. On Friday night, the evening before their planned getaway, I acted completely normal. I made Mark dinner. We watched a movie together. I even thanked him for being so patient while I adjusted to motherhood. He probably went to sleep thinking everything was going exactly according to his plan. Saturday morning, Mark left early, claiming he needed to get to his work retreat. He kissed Emma goodbye, told me to take care of myself, and promised to call me that evening. The performance was almost impressive in its complete insincerity. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I put the first phase of our plan into action. I called both sets of parents, Mark's and mine, and asked them to come over for an important family meeting. I told them I had something serious to discuss about Mark and my marriage, but I didn't give any details over the phone. Within 2 hours, both of our families had gathered in our living room, expecting to hear about some minor marital issue that could be resolved with family support and counseling. Jordan was doing the same thing at their house with Alex's family and their own parents. We had coordinated our timing perfectly. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while Mark and Alex were checking into their romantic hotel room, both of our families were learning the truth about what had been happening. Presented everything calmly and methodically, the timeline of the affair, the text messages, the photographs from the private investigator, and most importantly, the calculated cruelty of Mark's timing in asking for a divorce 1 week after Emma was born. The reaction was immediate and powerful. But that was just the beginning of what we had planned. The family meeting went exactly as Jordan and I had anticipated. Both sets of parents were horrified, not just by the infidelity, but by the calculating way Mark had timed his divorce request when I was most vulnerable. My mother, who had always adored Mark, was particularly devastated. She kept saying, "I don't understand how someone could be so cruel to their own wife and newborn baby." Mark's parents were equally shocked. His father, a man of strong moral principles, was visibly angry. "This is not how we raised him," he kept repeating. His mother was crying, apologizing to me over and over, as if Mark's actions were somehow her fault. The shame and disappointment in their faces told me that Mark was going to face consequences from his family that he had never anticipated. But the family meetings were just phase 1 of our plan. Phase 2 began that evening when Mark called me from his work retreat. He sounded relaxed and happy, probably fresh from an afternoon with Alex, completely unaware that his secret was no longer secret. "How's everything at home?" he asked casually. "How's Emma?" "Oh, we're fine," I replied sweetly. "Actually, we had some visitors today. Your parents stopped by, and so did mine. It was lovely to have the whole family together to discuss our situation." There was a pause. "What situation?" "Well, the divorce, of course. And Alex, I thought it was important that our families understood what was really happening and why you decided to end our marriage so suddenly." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I could practically hear his brain trying to process what I had just said. He had been so confident that I was too weak and overwhelmed to investigate or fight back. The realization that I had not only discovered his affair, but had also informed both of our families, was clearly not part of his carefully crafted plan. "Sarah, what exactly did you tell them?" His voice had lost all its casual confidence. "The truth, Mark, all of it." Then I hung up. Within minutes, his phone was probably ringing with calls from his parents, his siblings, and other family members who had heard the news. His perfect weekend getaway with Alex was about to become much more complicated. What Mark didn't know was that Jordan and I had planned for his reaction. We knew he would panic once he realized we had exposed the affair, and we were ready for whatever he might do next. Sure enough, within an hour of my phone call, Mark was texting me frantically, asking me to call him back, saying we needed to talk, that I didn't understand the whole situation, but I wasn't interested in his explanations or his attempts to control the narrative anymore. I had spent 2 weeks listening to his calm, calculated reasons for destroying our family, and now it was my turn to be in control of the conversation. Instead of responding to his texts, I focused on phase 3 of our plan. Jordan and I had decided that since Mark and Alex had been planning their future together while lying to both of us, they deserved to face the consequences of their choices together. Publicly. On Sunday morning, while they were probably having what they thought was a romantic breakfast at their hotel, Jordan and I executed the final phase of our response. We had prepared a detailed timeline of the affair, complete with screenshots of messages and photographs from the private investigator, and we shared it with their workplace. Now, some people might think this was vindictive, but Jordan and I saw it differently. Mark and Alex had been using company time and resources for their affair. They had been lying to their colleagues, their families, and their spouses. They had made their personal drama everyone else's problem by conducting their relationship in a professional environment. We simply made sure that everyone who had been unknowingly covering for them or making excuses for their behavior knew the truth. The response from their workplace was swift and serious. Both Mark and Alex held positions of responsibility and trust, and their behavior had created potential liability issues for the company. By Monday morning, they were both facing professional consequences that would follow them for years. But the most satisfying part of our response was still to come, because we had saved the best for last. When Mark finally came home on Sunday evening, he walked into a house that no longer felt like his sanctuary. I was sitting in the living room, calm and composed, with Emma sleeping peacefully in my arms. He looked exhausted, stressed, and completely defeated. His perfect plan had unraveled in spectacular fashion, and he knew it. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, using the same words he had used 2 weeks earlier when he asked for a divorce. But this time, his voice was pleading rather than demanding. "No, Mark, we really don't," I replied calmly. "You've said everything you needed to say. You told me you wanted a divorce, that you wanted different things, that it would be better for everyone if we kept things clean and simple. Well, congratulations. You're getting exactly what you asked for." I handed him an envelope, similar to the one he had presented to me that devastating Friday night. Inside were divorce papers, filed by my attorney, documenting his adultery and requesting primary custody of Emma, based on his abandonment and infidelity. I was also requesting the house, alimony, and child support that reflected his actual income, not the reduced amount he had probably planned to claim. Sarah, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you planned this affair while I was pregnant. That you timed your divorce request for when you thought I'd be too weak to fight back. That you used our newborn daughter as a prop in your manipulation strategy. I stood up, still holding Emma. There's nothing to explain, Mark. I understand everything perfectly now. The most beautiful part of our response wasn't the legal consequences, or the family shame, or even the professional repercussions. It was the look on his face when he realized that the weak, vulnerable woman he thought he was manipulating had outplanned, outmaneuvered, and completely outsmarted him. Jordan divorced, Alex too, and we remained friends throughout the process, supporting each other as we rebuilt our lives. 6 months later, Emma and I were thriving in our new life, while Mark was dealing with the long-term consequences of his choices. Everyone had expected me to fall apart when my husband abandoned me with a newborn baby. Instead, I showed them exactly what a strong woman looks like when someone underestimates her. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't tears or begging, it's strategic, decisive action that leaves your betrayer facing the full consequences of their choices. And that, as they say, is how you turn your worst moment into your greatest victory. But my story doesn't end there, because what happened next would test everything I thought I knew about myself and my capacity for forgiveness. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, just as I was starting to feel like I had my life back on track, Mark did something that would force me to make the hardest decision of my life. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was giving Emma her bath when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Mark standing on my front porch, but he looked different. Gone was the confident, calculating man who had asked for a divorce. This version of Mark looked broken, desperate, and genuinely remorseful in a way I had never seen before. I almost didn't answer the door. Part of me wanted to let him stand there, to feel what it was like to be ignored and dismissed the way he had dismissed me. But something about his posture, the way he was holding his shoulders, made me curious enough to open the door with the chain still attached. Sarah, please, he said immediately. I know I have no right to be here, no right to ask anything of you, but I need 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to tell you something that changes everything. I looked at him through the crack in the door. This man who had shattered my world so completely, and I felt something I didn't expect, pity. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, like he had lost significant weight, like life had been grinding him down systematically. Mark, we have nothing to discuss. The divorce is final. The custody arrangement is in place, and I'm moving on with my life. Whatever crisis you're having with Alex, or your career, isn't my problem anymore. But then he said something that made me freeze. Alex is dead, Sarah, and there's something about that night, about why I really asked for the divorce, that you need to know. My blood went cold. Despite everything Mark had put me through, despite the calculated cruelty of his timing and his methods, I had never wished harm on Alex. The affair had destroyed 2 marriages, but I had never wanted anyone to actually die. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. Mark stepped inside, and I could see immediately that he was barely holding himself together. His hands were shaking as he sat down on the edge of the couch, the same couch where he had asked me for a divorce 4 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Alex died in a car accident 2 weeks ago, he said quietly. Single car collision, late at night, coming home from work. The police said it looked like they fell asleep at the wheel, but he trailed off, running his hands through his hair, in a gesture I remembered from our marriage when he was trying to find the words for something difficult. But what, Mark? I found myself asking, even though part of me didn't want to know. But Alex had been drinking a lot, every night for the past month. Jordan told me at the funeral that Alex had been having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, was consumed with guilt about what we had done to you and to their family. Mark looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and haunted. Sarah, I think Alex died because of what we did to you. The room felt suddenly cold. I sat down across from him, Emma babbling happily in her bouncy seat between us, completely unaware of the adult conversation happening around her. Mark, you can't blame yourself for a car accident. People make choices about drinking and driving. That's not on you. But that's not all, he continued. There's something else, something I should have told you from the beginning, something that explains why I really asked for the divorce when I did. I waited. feeling that familiar dread building in my stomach. Even now, months later, Mark still had more secrets, more revelations that would change my understanding of everything that had happened. The affair with Alex wasn't my idea, Sarah. It wasn't even really an affair at first. Mark was speaking so quietly, I had to lean forward to hear him. Alex was blackmailing me. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Blackmailing him. About what? And how did that explain the text messages I had seen, the I love yous, the planning for their future together? What Mark told me next would rewrite the entire story I thought I knew. ... Double quotes. 6 months ago, I made a mistake at work. A big one, Mark began, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a project, a government contract worth millions, and I missed a critical deadline because I was distracted with preparing for Emma's arrival. The client was furious, and the company lost not just that contract but their reputation with that entire sector. I stared at him, trying to process what this had to do with Alex or with our divorce. Mark had never mentioned any work problems during my pregnancy. If anything, he had seemed less stressed about work than usual. My boss was going to fire me, Sarah. Not just fire me, but make sure I could never work in that industry again. The financial penalties alone would have bankrupted us. And with Emma coming... Mark's voice broke slightly. I was terrified. I didn't know how to tell you that. I had potentially destroyed our family's financial security right before our daughter was born. So what does this have to do with Alex? I asked, though I was starting to get a sick feeling about where this story was going. Alex knew about the mistake. They were on the project team, and they offered to help me cover it up. Said they could adjust some reports, backdate some communications, make it look like the delay wasn't entirely my fault. Mark looked down at his hands. At first, it seemed like Alex was just being a good colleague, trying to help a friend in trouble. But I could see where this was heading. What did Alex want in return? At first, nothing. Just said we were friends. That they understood how scary it was to potentially lose everything when you have a baby coming. But then, a few weeks later, Alex started asking for small favors, lunch meetings, staying late to work on projects together, asking me to cover for them when they needed to leave early. I felt a chill of understanding. Alex was using the cover-up to manipulate you exactly. And then the requests became more personal. Alex started talking about their marriage problems, about how they felt trapped, about how they wished they could find someone who really understood them. Mark's voice was getting stronger now, as if telling the truth was giving him some kind of relief. I should have stopped it then, should have confessed about the work mistake and faced the consequences. But I was so scared of losing everything right when you needed me most. The picture was becoming clearer, but it was so much more complicated than I had realized. So the affair... started as emotional manipulation and became something more when I was too weak to resist. Mark finished. By the time you were 8 months pregnant, Alex was threatening to expose the cover-up unless I left you and started a real relationship with them. I sat back in my chair, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me once again. Wait, I said, holding up my hand. Let me understand this. You're telling me that Alex manipulated you into an affair by threatening your career, and then forced you to divorce me by threatening to expose both the affair and the work cover-up. Mark nodded miserably. Alex said that if I didn't leave you within a month of Emma being born, they would tell everyone at work about both the original mistake and our relationship. I would have lost my job, you would have discovered the affair, in the worst possible way, and we would have been financially ruined with a newborn baby. I stood up and began pacing, my mind racing. This changed everything, but it also changed nothing. Mark, even if that's true, even if Alex was manipulating you, you still chose to have an emotional affair. You still chose to lie to me for months. You still chose to ask me for a divorce 1 week after I gave birth, instead of telling me the truth and asking for help. I know, he said quickly. I know I made terrible choices. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I should have trusted you to help me figure out a solution. But Sarah, I was so scared of disappointing you, of not being the provider and protector I thought you needed me to be. So instead you decided to be the husband who abandons his wife with a newborn baby. I stopped pacing and looked at him directly. Mark, your logic doesn't make any sense. You were worried about disappointing me, so you chose to devastate me instead. The truth was, even if Mark's story was accurate, it didn't excuse his choices. Being manipulated didn't mean he had no agency, no options, no ability to come to me for help. He had chosen to protect his ego and his image of himself as a perfect provider rather than trust his wife with the truth. But there was something else bothering me about his story. Mark, I saw those text messages. I saw Alex saying I love you and you saying it back. I saw you two planning your future together. How do you explain that if this was all just blackmail? Mark's face crumpled. Because somewhere along the way, I started believing it was real. Alex was so good at the manipulation, so convincing, that I actually thought I was falling in love. I convinced myself that maybe this was fate, that maybe I was supposed to be with Alex instead of you. It was like being stabbed all over again, hearing him admit that he had genuinely believed he loved someone else more than me. But it wasn't real, Sarah. Mark continued desperately. The moment I moved out, the moment the divorce was final, Alex's behavior changed completely. The loving, supportive person disappeared, and all that was left was someone cold and calculating who had gotten exactly what they wanted. I sat back down, feeling emotionally exhausted. What do you mean? Alex had never intended to build a life with me. They just wanted to prove they could destroy a marriage, could manipulate someone into leaving their family. Once I had actually done it, once you and I were divorced, Alex lost interest completely. Mark's voice was bitter now. They moved on to their next target, another married colleague, and started the same pattern all over again. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Alex manipulated Mark into destroying our marriage, but it had all been some kind of twisted game. Our family had been collateral damage in someone else's psychological manipulation experiment. When I realized what had really happened, when I understood that I had thrown away everything that mattered for someone who never cared about me at all, I tried to get Alex to tell you the truth. I begged them to help me explain to you what had really happened, so maybe you could understand that the divorce wasn't really about you or our marriage. And what did Alex say? They laughed, Mark said quietly, actually laughed and said that if I tried to tell you the truth, they would make sure everyone at work knew, not just about the original cover-up, but about how weak and easily manipulated I was. They said no one would ever trust me professionally. Again, I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Part of me felt vindicated that my instincts about Alex had been right, that there had been something fundamentally twisted about the whole situation. But another part of me felt genuinely sorry for Mark, recognizing that he had been as much a victim of Alex's manipulation as I had been. So Alex kept controlling you, even after the divorce, I said, until they died. Yes, every time I tried to reach out to you, to explain, to ask for any chance at reconciliation, Alex would threaten to destroy what was left of my career and reputation. Mark looked directly at me for the first time since he had started talking. Sarah, I know I made terrible choices. I know I hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable. But I need you to know that losing you and Emma was never what I wanted. But even with this new information, I wasn't sure what Mark expected from me. Mark, I said carefully, I appreciate you finally telling me the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry that Alex manipulated both of us in such a cruel way. But what exactly are you hoping will happen now? Alex is dead, so they can't threaten you anymore. But that doesn't undo the months of lies or the way you handled the divorce. Mark looked hopeful for the first time since he had arrived. I was wondering if maybe we could try again, start over. I know it would take time. I know you'd need to learn to trust me again. But Sarah, we were so good together before all this happened. We loved each other. We built a beautiful life together. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we used to walk together on weekend mornings, where we had planned to teach Emma to ride a bike someday. The life Mark was talking about felt like something from a different lifetime, something that had happened to different people. Mark, even if I could forgive you for the affair and the lies, even if I could understand that you were being manipulated, I can't forgive the way you treated me when you asked for the divorce. I turned back to face him. You watched me struggle through recovery from childbirth. You saw how vulnerable and exhausted I was. And you chose that moment to destroy my world because you thought I'd be too weak to fight back. I know, and I hate myself for that. I was thinking like someone who was being manipulated, not like someone who loved you. But that's exactly the problem, Mark. When you were under pressure, when you were scared, when you had to choose between protecting me and protecting yourself, you chose yourself. Every time, I picked up Emma from her bouncy seat, needing to hold her close. What happens the next time you're scared or under pressure? How do I know you won't throw me away again to save yourself? Mark was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I had said. Finally, he spoke. You're right. I failed the most important test of our marriage. When you needed me to be strong and honest, I was weak and deceptive instead. It was the first time he had acknowledged the fundamental issue without making excuses or asking for understanding. It was also, I realized, probably too late. But then, Emma started crying, and something unexpected happened that would change everything once more. As Emma began to fuss in my arms, Mark instinctively stood up and reached toward her, then stopped himself, his hands dropping to his sides. The look on his face was pure anguish, not just sadness, but the deep grief of a father who realized he had lost the right to comfort his own child. Can I? He started to ask, then stopped. I'm sorry. I know I don't have the right to ask. Something in his voice, the raw pain of a parent who had sacrificed his relationship with his child for what he thought was protection, broke through my anger. You can hold her, Mark. She's still your daughter. The moment Emma settled into his arms, something shifted in the room. She looked up at him with those wide, curious eyes that babies have, completely unaware of all the adult drama that had surrounded her short life. Mark started crying, not the desperate tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the quiet, heartbroken tears of someone who had lost everything that mattered. She's gotten so big, he whispered. I've missed so much already. Watching him with Emma, I realized something I hadn't expected. My anger toward Mark was different from my anger toward Alex. Alex had been a predator, someone who had deliberately set out to destroy families for their own twisted satisfaction. Mark had been weak, had made terrible choices, but he had genuinely loved Emma and me, even if he had failed us completely. Mark, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. What you're asking for, the chance to try again, isn't just about forgiveness. It's about trust. And trust isn't something you can rebuild with explanations or apologies. It has to be earned through consistent actions over time. He looked up from Emma, hope flickering in his eyes. Does that mean you're willing to let me try to earn it back? I was quiet for a long moment, watching him with our daughter, thinking about everything I had learned about myself over the past few months. I had discovered that I was stronger than I had ever known, more resilient, more capable of protecting myself and my child than I had imagined. I had also learned that I was capable of strategic thinking and decisive action when people I loved were threatened. But I had also learned something else. Holding on to anger and resentment, while satisfying in the short term, was exhausting in the long term. And Emma deserved to have a father who was present and committed, even if her parents couldn't be married. I'm not ready to talk about reconciliation, I said finally. I may never be ready for that, but I am willing to talk about co-parenting. About finding a way for you to be Emma's father without the constraints of the current custody arrangement. It wasn't what Mark had hoped for, but I could see him recognizing it as more than he had expected. Over the next several months, Mark and I began the slow, careful process of rebuilding some form of relationship for Emma's sake. It wasn't easy, and there were many setbacks along the way. Mark had to prove through his actions, not just his words, that he could be trusted to put Emma's needs first, even when it was difficult or inconvenient for him. He started by showing up consistently for his scheduled visits, not just when it was convenient, but every single time. Even when he was sick or tired or dealing with work stress, he began attending Emma's pediatric appointments, taking an active role in decisions about her care and development. Most importantly, he stopped trying to use his time with Emma as an opportunity to lobby for reconciliation with me. I watched him carefully during this period, looking for signs that he was reverting to his old patterns of selfishness and manipulation. But what I saw instead was a man who was genuinely committed to becoming the father he should have been from the beginning. He wasn't perfect, but he was consistent, and consistency was what Emma needed from him. The breakthrough came 8 months after his confession about Alex's manipulation. Emma was taking her first steps, and Mark happened to be there for his weekend visit when it happened. Instead of trying to create some kind of romantic moment out of this milestone, he simply celebrated our daughter's achievement and made sure I got it on video. That night, after Emma was asleep and Mark was getting ready to leave, he said something that surprised me. Sarah, I want you to know that I've stopped hoping we'll get back together. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I mean I've finally accepted that I destroyed something that can't be repaired. I spent months thinking that if I could just explain everything, if I could just prove I was sorry enough, you'd take me back. But that was still me being selfish, still me thinking about what I wanted instead of what was best for everyone. He was right, and hearing him acknowledge it meant more to me than all of his earlier apologies and explanations. What I want now, he continued, is to be the best father I can be to Emma, and to be someone you can trust to co-parent with, even if we're never married again. I want to prove that I've learned something from losing everything, that I can actually put other people's needs before my own. It was the most mature thing Mark had ever said to me, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see that Mark's betrayal, while devastating at the time, ultimately led me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. I learned that I could be strategic when I needed to be, that I could fight for myself and my daughter when circumstances required it, and that I could rebuild my life on my own terms. Mark and I never reconciled as a married couple, but we did learn to be effective co-parents. He proved, through consistent actions over time, that he could be trusted with Emma's well-being, even if he couldn't be trusted with my heart. Emma now has a father who is present and engaged, and I have a co-parenting relationship based on mutual respect rather than romantic love. The most important lesson I learned from this entire experience is that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the catalyst for discovering who you really are. When Mark asked for a divorce 1 week after Emma was born, he thought he was taking advantage of my weakness. Instead, he forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. And that strength, more than any romantic relationship, has become the foundation of the life I've built for Emma and myself. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't forgiveness or revenge, it's simply refusing to let someone else's weakness define your future. That's a lesson I'll make sure Emma learns as she grows up, that she is capable of surviving anything, of protecting herself and those she loves, and of building a life that reflects her own values rather than someone else's limitations. And that, ultimately, is how you turn your worst moment into your greatest victory.